that is of interest to our countries are looking ahead to Glasgow. So again, the focus on Glasgow. Now let me remind you that GIMO has an in-house center of sustainable development. It is very active in education. We have a class of magistrate studies already this year with the mission to train professionals of sustainable development. So today's conference is in part a result of the center's activity. So we're moving towards Glasgow, and we want to have a better understanding about our contribution, about our vision, common position, because Glasgow is called upon to finalize the architecture of sustainable development. To quote Anatoly Chubais and his speech in the beginning of the day, Russia has undertaken a non-decarbonization commitment in 2010. Until recently, this elicited huge skepticism. The anti-carbon lobby, the skeptics, were very powerful indeed. However, yesterday the President of the Russian Federation said, not later than 2060, we will achieve carbon neutrality. So we have a benchmark and we have a deadline. And this is a good start. To be sure, this costs money. This involves costs. Green economy requires financing. A lot of financial instruments are already in place, and green dollars, green credits, green loans. So this is the resource that will power this transition. But economists giggle at this kind of deployment. They say at least $50 trillion are needed to start with, to start the transition towards a non-carbon economy. This amount is bound to grow, and there's simply no way to borrow that money in the banks. The green transition and the green revolution, so much spoken about in the world, means also a social revolution. This means the money has not only to be allocated, but properly distributed. It is a social dimension. It is a social resolution. New paradigm of thinking when profit-making is a bad thing. And the third line of thought I would like to offer to you for discussion, well, it's green finances. Again, green finances. We have experts present here. That's all very fine. But I suggest to think about other things. To think about our shared vision in the CIS, a common vision and common position of countries that are heavily dependent on coal, oil, gas. We are a huge producer and a huge consumer of carbon, totaling some 40% of the budget, 20% of the GDP. So this sort of transformation from carbon to carbon-free status is a tall order. Therefore, challenges are huge lying ahead of us. we do have something to discuss, and we have a whole good battery of speakers eager to speak out. I would like to give the floor to someone who is very well-heeled in green economy and sustainable development. Tatiana Dmitrievna Volovaya, Director General of the UN Office in Vienna. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. One of the lessons of pandemic is that virtual contacts will never replace live contacts. To be sure, remote technologies continue us to go forward, to maintain contacts, to keep on moving and discussing things in extreme circumstances, but still live contacts and live meetings are very important, and it's a rare commodity. This subject matter of sustainable development is very close to me personally, even before I took on this office.
I was very active in the Eurasian Union, and when I came to Geneva, and when my colleagues would start talking about sustainable development, I would smile and say back that the Eurasian Economic Union, where I had worked for 8 years before, is the first and the only regional organization which presented its own voluntary report on this subject. And we drew it up in 2016. At that time, I was a minister. I would go to New York for most important events, and that was the subject which were presented on behalf of the Eurasian Economic Union and Eurasian Commission. Eurasian. And because we saw that this is a very important subject, and the agenda is very important. It was important for us to understand how close our agenda was to sustainable goals. Because for sustainable goals to be really achievable, all countries, all regional associations must understand that implementing these goals is not just the task of the initiators, but it's also in keeping with their national agenda. That's why I am very glad that sustainable goals have become part of the agenda at every level, in mass media, in the economic community. And of course, we should now talk not just about how important to reach them, how important it is, but also about how to do it, how to achieve these goals. And we also should talk about the deliverables, what should be delivered at the end. And it's not only a green revolution, it's a social revolution as well. Because the purposes of the 17 sustainable goals, they are different, and they are also connected with challenges, but they also include fighting poverty and also decent labor, and developing equal society of equal rights, equal access to clean water, which we saw at the time of the pandemic how complicated it can be. So sustainable goals are not only about environment, they're also about social development. And this is a very important subject. At the same time, we must understand that the countries of the world differ. So within the 17 goals of sustainable goals, some of them are more prior, others are less. At the same time, there are goals, and the solution of some goals can help in other spheres. For example, in education or equal rights of women, if these goals are achieved, then automatically, at the same time, we tackle the problems of inequality, fighting poverty. So this is a very important subject for discussion at national level. Which specific sustainable goals are key goals for this or that country. So as to Russia, this is a very revolutionary decision on the carbon neutrality which the United Nations was looking forward to, waiting for this reaction. This is the goal of the Russian Federation. At the same time, we must understand it's very difficult to reach. And it's important to understand now how to transform the economy, how to provide for carbon neutrality and economic development at the same time. So this is a challenge which many countries are facing, which depend on the carbon economy, but who also understand that the carbon economy is a thing of the past, and it's time to reorient the economies. There are financial aspects here as well as others, and so we need to find finances for sustainable development. I want to draw your attention to our UN initiative. In my office, there is an office which is ESG Lab, and together with the Swiss community, we are organizing another second event, which is called Building Bridges. And in Geneva, we try to intensify the dialogue between two communities which do not often communicate to each other. This is the financial banking community, and they often say that we have lots of money but few projects. And another community which represents the needs for economic development, governmental, non-governmental organizations who usually say we have wonderful projects but we do not have financing. So we are trying to build a bridge between these two communities using our venue. It will be the second event of this nature. We hope to make it regular. Last year we did not have it for understandable reasons, and I think this is the practice which can be emulated. But there is another subject, not only financial one. I'm an economist myself, as you have heard, and I deal with a subject which is often discussed, and this is how can we evaluate statistically our achievements. One of the problems of sustainable development is in the fact that the indicators which we use for economic development, they do not include any sustainable element. And respectively, if a country really takes the path of sustainable development, environmentally wise and economically wise, its GDP will not be growing as fast as it does during the carbon economy. And this is a very serious, I would say, scientific challenge, because if we start measuring the new green economy using the indicators of the 20th century, and it is directed at the extensive growth at any price, then we won't have good results. Why? Because GDP indicators are important for politicians, for the government. Before the election, any party claims that in the past we have ensured the economic growth by so many percent, or that I promised to do it, but we don't know at what expense these new jobs were created or the economic growth. Therefore, finding a system of indicators of sustainable development is a very important challenge. I think no less important than finding financial resources. Thank you. I slightly exceeded my time limit, but it is so great to speak offline. Thank you. You mentioned very important news for us. Your office and the Swiss banking community are working at it, and our community will also have to think about it. So cooperation, connectivity through Tsurum, GIMO, or directly, we'll try to do that, to establish such contacts. Now, Chernyshov, please take your seat, because your seat is vacant, and you represent the Eurasian Commission that Tatiana Valovaya has mentioned. We cannot ignore your participation. The floor is given to Dmitry Aksakov. He is the executive director of the business bloc of the Внешэкономбанк, and you probably know that Внешэкономбанk is a center of methodology for sustainable development and ESG. So that's an important presentation. Dear colleagues, thank you for inviting us to address you. That's a very interesting discussion. That's true, especially in the light of the statement which we heard yesterday. Green financing, sustainable financing, is not a solution. It's only part of a great number of measures which are necessary to take to reach carbon neutrality, to deal with environmental problems the world is facing. But still it is important. So green financing is an instrument of scale of technologies which have already been used and which are economically viable. In the world, this instrument, as you know, is of great importance. There is a great demand on the part of investors, and there is certain shortage of good quality projects where international investors can invest, and also as indicators to be able to call this investment green or not. Many banks and investment funds compete in calling themselves green, because the organizations which invest in them, like pension funds, endowments of universities and other, they have this demand, the requirement. We want you to take care of the future of the planet. We want your investments to be used for positive ends, as far as the climate is concerned, or the social, the community. Therefore, they call themselves investment, green investment. But there is a shortage of definition to identify the good quality label of whether you are green or not. Now we are tackling this problem, and the definition of, in accordance with the European taxonomy of green financing, can be used, and it shows those activities which Europeans understand as green activities, and they contribute to carbon neutrality. So the aims that the European Union has elaborated. So the Bank of Russia some time ago suggested that in Russia we should also work out our own definitions. It's understandable that economies of different countries differ, and respectively definitions should also reflect specific features of individual countries. We have been told that Russia needs its own definition of whether it's green or not. They must be understandable to our international colleagues, but they must reflect our special features. In going back, I want to say that there is a great demand on financial instruments in the international markets, results that it is profitable to borrow through these instruments. And in the future, borrowing through non-green instruments would be complicated. So in early 2020, our bank elaborated the Russian methodology. And the first three documents which you see here, they are most important. The first is methodological recommendations, a list of the steps which should be undertaken to issue green bonds or to attract green credit, and taxonomy of green projects is a list or lists of activities which are believed to be green. Now a few words about green adaptation projects. So green are the activities which classically in the world believed to be as such. This is renewable sources of energy, electric transport, first-class industrial production. And as to the adaptation projects, so these are the ones which refer classically to dirty industries such as oil and gas, coal. At the same time, these are the projects which can have a positive environmental impact. And when we look at Europe, we see that our European colleagues don't understand it. They understand that the economics is more complicated than traditional green industries. in order to implement transition and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, we must rely on transition technologies, on natural gas. Well, as to the nuclear energy, there are debates on the subject. That's why we decided to call green what is called traditionally green in Europe. So for us, the only difference is that we introduce nuclear energy here, where unlike them, we believe it's green. Europe is still in doubt. And as to the adaptation activities, which are classically non-green, but important for the energy transition. So here we have a list of activities which we recognize as green. I mentioned this already. So this one shows how we elaborated our documents. And we wanted them absolutely understandable to our international colleagues. Therefore, this is just a list of what we used from the European taxonomy, the International Association of the Capital Markets, and other approaches. One of our tasks at the forthcoming conference, COP26, is to show to the world our taxonomy and to give a more profound analysis. We want to introduce green labels, which would show the quality of green projects and attract international investment into Russia. Here we see the activities which are transition activities. Besides creating a green label, our second task was to create in the Russian legal space an official definition of what is sustainable financing, for us to have a chance to connect it, measures of support. Maybe some state subsidies, special regulation on the part of the central bank, maybe some taxation breaks, taking into account what President said yesterday, that Russia plans to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. We are sure that this work will be more active to elaborate measures of support, state measures of support. And green financing is an instrument of scale. It is not sufficient to achieve all the objectives in carbon neutrality. So it's important to pay attention to the previous types of financing, like angel investment, venture investment, because in the world the new economy is emerging and new technologies have to be elaborated, which are necessary for transition. As an example, I would mention what Mr. Chubais mentioned. This is capturing carbon dioxide and also hydrogen production. Technologies related to developing the electric transport and many other things. As you know, WEB, our bank is not just WEB, which finances huge industrial projects. It's just a family of development institutes. It's Rosnano and Fond Skolkovo and many others. And they are profoundly involved in this agenda. Teams which work with them are involved in elaborating technologies, and WEB's task is to find industrial partners for them who could test these new technologies. And this energy transition is a huge chance for Russia, a chance to become one of the initiators of the technologies in the world, those technologies which will be used, which will be needed in the decades to come. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. The floor is given to Yuri Olegovich Denisov, chairman of the board of the Moscow Stock Exchange. And this is the first stock exchange in Russia, which has a section of sustainable development with billions of rubles placed there. So that's an interesting, very important instrument of transition.
Хорошо. Спасибо. Спасибо большое. Спасибо большое, Игорь Юрьевич. На самом деле я тоже очень рад.
Well, I'm very glad to see this, to have this offline contacts and the ability to communicate. A couple of years ago, we could not appreciate it because in the past we did not have online conferences. Now online conferences are even more popular than offline conferences. Thank you. Also prepared the presentation. PowerPoint presentation, and to show that the changes which are undergoing in the world and reducing carbon dioxide and carbon neutrality and Russian economy's attempts to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. All this requires, as Igor Yurychik said quite correctly, transforming finances and requires financing.
Transformations would be needed in state financing and primarily in private financing. Private financing is right now channeled through instruments like stock exchange. We have just heard ideas about methodologies, proposals for solutions on how stock exchanges and international stocks can contribute to greening of the planet. So let's start from the beginning. This is the Moscow Stock Exchange. It is the largest stock exchange in Moscow. It is divided into 6 sectors. All of them can be had at any stock exchange. It's a traditional division. Total turnover is expected to reach $1 quadrillion. This 1 quadrillion is circulating in traditional sectors. However, the transition is imperative. Now the question is how to achieve this transition. Now we're doing the following things. We have established a separate sector of sustainable development that is trading green bonds and social bonds and that reflect the implementation of the national social and environmental projects. This is a place where bonds are issued, purchased, traded, and adding value. To trade in that sector, a company has to publish reports that include the sustainable development dimension. We have had recently a study, and several indexes have been proposed to evaluate and to rate companies on their sustainable development achievements. I believe already today there is good room to trade and profit from trading ESG bonds or bonds containing ESG element. It is indeed necessary that all investors understand what they're into, what they're investing into. All segments, all investors have a footprint in our stock exchange, banking sector, corporations, funds and foundations, investment associations, you name it.
Мы видим, что за последнее время пришли активно физические лица.
Now we are seeing a growth in the private investments. Private individuals are putting their money into stock exchange.
14,5 миллионов.
This year we have 14.5 million individual investors operating on the stock exchange, and that number is growing.
Года это индивидуальные инвестиционные счета, когда вы можете получить инвестиционные лоты.
Every individual can open an individual investment account and operate on the market.
То есть что-то не оформил. Мне кажется, это интересная возможность до конца года это сделать.
Now this opportunity is still open till the end of the year.
Видимо, в том, что активно, конечно, участвуют иностранные инвесторы в торгах.
Foreign investors and international investors are very active in our operations. Forex is also a very active, vibrant sector.
Вкладывали именно в возможности такой торговли.
The foreigners are first to come into this one.
А зачем все это делается?
Now, what is the reason for doing all that?
Эмитенты, в конечном счете, стали
We're doing that in order to
информации инвесторам
achieve disclosure from
с точки зрения
emitters, from issuers.
устойчивого развития.
They have to disclose their green identity or green element.
Сам как эмитент, потому что у нас, как у эмитента, физических лиц, например, у нас 300 тысяч физических лиц инвесторов.
We have about 300,000 private investors.
Вот это иностранный. И, соответственно, мы
Another 300,000 are foreign investors.
принципом устойчивого развития мы публикуем уже 2 года. У нас выходит отчет об
For over
устойчивом
2 years, we include a section in our reports on sustainable and green development. All principles of sustainable development are mainstreamed to our operations and reporting processes.
пронизали, скажем так.
We see to it that these principles are
Из
aligned with
17
and implemented.
принципов устойчивого развития,
Altogether, there are 17 SDG principles.
которые соответствуют нашему бизнесу.
We have chosen 7 that are fully in line with our ambit of operations.
Торгов, и это тоже очень важно.
This is a factor that affects
Вместе с индустрией
or necessitates the adjustment of our operations and protocols.
и как вы видите, у нас есть и платформа для среднего
We already have a platform for small and medium-sized businesses.
я говорил, индекса облигаций.
We have an index of bonds.
Специально мы проводим достаточно большой. И что самое главное, мы в этом году сделали большой труд.
And what is important today, this year,
ESG, руководство по ESG.
we have established an index reflecting the ESG transformation.
Вот теперь как раз о том, о чем говорил Игорь Юрьевич.
Now, coming back to what Igor Yurievich said,
Сектор устойчивого развития, вы видите,
we have a sector of sustainable development. This is the content of this sector.
в этот год у нас уже 127 миллиардов.
Today we have 127 billion of
Зеленые облигации.
value issued in bonds.
Это размещение первого выпуска зеленых облигаций правительства Москвы, который был сделан в этом
The first investor and the largest, by far the largest investor, was the government of Moscow.
парка на электробусы и на
The money they harvested went towards financing electric public transportation.
для того, чтобы все понимали, как вообще такое, как развивать принципы ESG, это достаточно сложно для многих, потому что многие,
The whole setup of ESG bond trading is very complicated to understand at a glance.
но, соответственно, важно это и для инвесторов,
However, this is important, and both investors and issuers buy into this principle and comply.
создали гид. Вот этот гид, я считаю, что
To help navigate the system, we have issued a set of
его, он очень полно раскроет, что происходит
guidelines,
в мире и что происходит с этой точки зрения по развитию у нас в стране.
or a travel book, if you wish, that will help you understand how things work.
В заключение я бы хотел сказать еще несколько слов по поводу
And finally, a couple of words about the new measures that we are applying, our new policies.
организации
in terms of organizing our trading and recording our trading sessions. This is a whole infrastructure that we have to build. It is a part of our accountability. First of all, we have all ingredients in place. We have a full set of investors. We have a full set of instruments. We have clearing capability. We have a bank that services our operations, over 1 billion operations. This bank is fourth largest bank in the country in terms of assets. So we have a central repository which holds assets of 75 trillion. It is very important that this repository would have an official register of our bonds. And another important thing is our reputation. We are sustainable, we are stable, we are reliable, we are accessible. Our accessibility is rated 4 times 9, which means 9.999. And one more thing in conclusion. In terms of development, we have passed a very important milestone. We have a strategy to increase the share of ESG instruments in our trading operations. We're doing everything to help this baby walk on its feet. Thank you. Thank you, Yuri Olegovich. Now I give the floor to the director of the Federal Agro Export Promotion Center, Dmitry Grigorьevich Krasnov. Now we do well understand that agriculture accounts for 20% of CO2 emissions. Many countries have committed to reduce by 60% the emission of gases in agriculture. We have not yet signed up to this commitment, but we do have plans. And Mr. Krasnov, please, you have the floor. Tell us more about this. Just 1 week ago, we had a major event, nationwide agro-industrial exposition. It is a national event with conferences and meetings to discuss the green agenda. It brought together producers, public officials, government officials, experts, to discuss this new sustainable green agenda. To us, there's nothing new. Russian agriculture has been a steady champion of international trade in green products. So this ESG agenda is to us essentially a list of requirements from consumers of our products. And being driven by consumer demand, we have to abide and comply with these requirements. So we have set to ourselves this challenge. We're going through a very difficult transition period related to the pandemic, but we are breaking out of this pandemic with flying colors. We are steadily developing across the board. So to us, the main challenge is to maintain the momentum. Recent trades in agricultural markets have gained ground. Just to give you an example, the block of the Suez Canal resulted in huge losses to the agricultural center. The losses were enormous, and this gives us an idea of how vulnerable we are to accidents like this, to the breakdown of logistical chains. As a result, we see an exponential growth of electronic trades. The world is moving toward healthy lifestyles, eco-food, eco-products. The people are eating or want to eat good food that raises or improves the immunity of the body. This is a huge trend in international market, including China. So we try to be in sync with this trend. Therefore, we have set a goal to ourselves to increase production of safe and quality products. All along, preserving sustainability, achieving sustainability, where there's little of it, to make a green transition. Green transition and green production is gaining ground across the world. The United States is, of course, a leader in this respect, but we are not far behind, and we intend to keep going. Again, as I said, we are actively engaged in international trade in agricultural products, and we are by far the most efficient actor in international agro-food. We have increased our trade by 20% compared to last year. This is a very powerful growth. We intend to improve our foothold in the international markets. Of course, largely this depends on our commitment to the green agriculture. Last year, we will have to certify our supplies going to the EU. Of course, ESG transformation carries risk in terms of maintaining the momentum of our growth. To investors and to producers, this means expenses, costs, finding new markets or losing old ones. So we have to keep step with the requirements of the consumers. Many companies are quick to react and to adjust, being quite aware that they are very dependent on exports. This means that they have to take fundamental decisions moving towards the green. Our country is huge with big variety of climatic conditions, weather, landscapes. Therefore, we have to take into account local conditions and act locally. Every local region area has to take measures that best suits this particular area. Changes in the climate show that agriculture is very vulnerable to climate changes. This vulnerability is very hard to pinpoint because effects and risks are diverse. Growing annual temperatures lead to the increased prolongation of vegetation. Land under cultivation may increase up to 50%. As we speak, we see a massive invasion of cultures of cultivation of corn and wheat far north. On the other hand, we see more often droughts and extreme weather events hitting many of our southern producers located in southern areas. Therefore, risks are growing. Russian agriculture is not a major contributor to emissions. According to UN, the average contribution of agriculture is 20%, but in Russia this figure is just 6%. Agriculture is a very promising area when it comes to reducing CO2. We have an extensive experience in returning to productivity lands that were previously abandoned. We are holders of experience and know-how of working with this kind of soils. We have a reserve of soils of 4 million hectares. 13.2 million hectares we plan to rehabilitate and return it to productive uses. We plan to do this without doing additional harm to the environment. We have to do it to maintain our positions in the global markets. We are pretty much aware that abandoned soils store a good number of CO2 that is bound to be liberated when disturbed.
In cattle breeding, this is also a very important problem, so we have to think about special feed for the cattle and waste disposal. And in introducing new standards and new regulatory measures, we should also keep in mind some other important measures. Like not in all countries there are special requirements for agriculture as far as climate change is concerned. One of the reasons is the low emissions, and on the other hand, objective difficulties how to calculate these emissions. So the technology of calculating emissions, this is an open question at the international level. So we need here recognition on all parts. For agricultural complex, calculating the emissions is more difficult and more expensive because there is no specific pipe, and therefore there is no place for a counter. State support is required here to calculate these emissions. I would like to note that, of course, what is important for us is to defend our position, because we cannot simply copy the requirements of other countries, because they have different conditions. For example, the European Union demand for the well-being of cattle, taking into account their limited capacity to increase the number of their cattle. Here we have a different situation, and we can significantly improve the number of cattle in our country. Therefore, we need a balanced approach as to the use of such practices in our country. At the same time, some successful practices can be used, and state support here for the problems of waste disposal in cattle breeding, which the use in the European Union, the use of agricultural fertilizers, increasing the fertility of the land. All of these practices are the ones which we are going to use to borrow. Another important subject is in producing agricultural products is labor shortage, and working with human capital, with people, improving and developing agricultural territories, and increasing the attractiveness of the agricultural sector are very important. So we implement quite a number of projects which can be transformed and adapted to the new goals. Another important factor here, another important issue for the agricultural sector is education, and including into the educational agenda courses and educating specialists who will be literate in the ESG agenda. We understand that awareness raising here will make this agenda part of the agriculture. We understand very well that the ESG issues are the need to profoundly analyze the importance of this policy, not just something imposed outside. Agriculture is a rather conservative sector, and choosing its ways of development will require structural transformations, the flows of investment, increased investment into the sphere as well. But using new technologies and responsible approach will make it possible for us to transform, and we know that major companies are actively involved in this agenda. They create special divisions aimed at implementing ESG, and the socially responsible business is not just a phrase, that's a fact of real life, and we in agriculture use it. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. You have mentioned us on 2 occasions, maybe not the name of GMO, but you need us as a resource to organize a venue for negotiations. With your colleagues from abroad, we are prepared to do that. And you need the people, and the first 2 masters which we are going to graduate next year, they are your potential specialists. And besides, we also have a department of the attaché on agricultural matters in the Russian embassy. So we'll be friends, we'll develop our friendship, and long live our ESG communication contact.
And I give the floor to Siegfried Wolf. Ziggy Wolf is a good friend of Russian Federation. He's got a lot of titles, but in this particular case, he is the member of the board of directors of GAS automotive company. And of course, we all remember that our green transformation started with electrical mobility and down with the fossil fuels. The floor is yours, Ziggy.
Thank you, Mr. Jürgens. Sorry, I'm still spending a lot of time here in Russia, don't speak Russian very well, so I have to go into English. First of all, I'm wondering that Vienna, Austria has, it seems, a good place in Russia. So, I just was hearing 2 major points, financing, and we all have to understand that an investor wants the money back. Who should pay and how we are going to pay our products, our usage, our transportation in future, if we all know that the change from fossil energy to renewables cost approximately 4 to 5 times more as we pay now. Second, if I'm talking about environment, we all have to understand that the Paris Agreement minus 2 degrees till 2100 started very aggressive. And if I just compare when the climate change started and we got climate warming in the end of 90s, and if you measure 1 cubic meter of air and look for the pollution, you had about 200 parts per million or ppms in 1 cubic meter. Nowadays, we have 400 parts per million per cubic meter. That means all what we are doing now is not enough. If we want to go against climate warming, we have to reduce, and we have to reduce 50%. And we are all talking at the time being to keep the status quo. But what will happen in Glasgow, and this is in direct relation with our role of carbon neutral transportation. The task of building a carbon neutral economy is part of today's global agenda, and all finances, all programs and everything is going into that direction. And the transport component is one of the biggest priorities and is critical to achieve those carbon footprint. This means that in the years to come, automotive industry in Russia and across the globe will have to perform a tremendous change, and we have to bring seriously a solution for zero carbon emission. But we cannot just talk about reducing emission at the car itself. We have to talk on all three scopes for transportation. Scope number one is the direct emission coming as a result from bringing raw materials and supply directly to the industry. Scope number two is the production itself. How we are going to produce in future zero emission free to fulfill this task. And of course, scope number three is associated directly with the use of the car, with driving the car, and this is seriously huge. Just if I compare our company, the biggest driver for CO2 emission is steel. And we have to work very clearly with our supply base and decarbonizing steel and other materials. We will have to go in a strong cooperation with the full supply chain, including energy providers, to go with us for a sustainability road. For that, we have to create formulas jointly together with our supply base and identify clear targets for our production. And for our understanding, in future, we need suppliers which follow exactly this road. On the auto industry, it's unmistakably clear that we must become carbon neutral till 2039. And the chairman of Daimler expressed in his recent speech very clearly that this will happen earlier because we have 4 main drivers for reducing this emission. Legislation first. Look at all parliaments and parties. Every green party is trying to go to this zero emission, and of course we all have to think about to do so. Next is investors. Yeah? You are bringing this discussion that we have green bonds and we have green investments. You were saying that the whole electrification in the city of Moscow is green. You financed it. We were participating on it because we are the biggest producer, I will come a little bit later, in electric buses. And it is also worth to mention that who is the biggest producer of in countries on the global scale. Russia, indeed, as we heard from our colleague before, is for 4% responsible. The European Union without England for 7%, India for 7%, US with 12%, and China over 20%, 23%. And this is something that we cannot say it's the others. Yeah? Either we are sinking on a global world and climate infecting us on a global scale, we have to do something about. And if I see also final numbers in who is the producer, In transport, we have about 10% of the emission. It's the third largest together with agriculture, around 10%. Then we have to think about energy supply is over 20%. And the industry itself around 15%. And as part of this European deal, we have an ambitious goal achieving 55% reduction of all CO2 emissions by 2030. It's a great story. And I was thinking Mr. Schüssel will be there. We were working very intensive on the European Green Deal roadmap, and we included Russia with a program called reforesting. That means plant more trees, because this is the only way to reduce CO2 if you have enough trees. This is a serious issue, what we have to do. But now let's come to scope number 3. It is our products, our cars, our buses on the market. And we are seriously good on the way. Ladies and gentlemen, did someone even think about that you from Russia exporting globally vehicles? If I would have raised the question, Jürgens, 10 years ago, people would say, no, I'm not going to buy a Russian vehicle. We are now the biggest export hub for Škoda vehicles, for Volkswagen Group, out of Russia, produced with my Russian team here in Nizhny Novgorod. And our product itself is in the European Union as well. But this had to do with a lot of education and building up a strong HR team. We work together with the most important institutes, with the Bauman Moscow State Technical University, with the State Technical University of Nizhny Novgorod, and a lot of others that we come to a very clear CO2 emission-free transportation. We brought and engineered the first LCV, Gazelle Electric, for not only the Russian market, we brought it as well to Germany. In 2018, we started with our Likhino bus plant, which belongs to the GAZ Group, and we are now, most of the blue buses which are electric are coming from us, coming from Russia, directly in a city, Moscow, which has a serious will to become a transporter with zero emission. That means we have electrified these vehicles now, and if, ladies and gentlemen, someone would have asked me 2 or 3 years ago for transportation with a truck for the so-called last mile, I would have said never ever batteries, never ever electrification. But if I see now, and we are working with the biggest producer now on electric truck, for the last mile transportation, means from distributions of Amazon, Post, etc., those vehicles will become up to 16 tons fully electrified. Why? Because we were able to reduce the battery itself in weight with 40%. Or you can say we increased the power of 40%. Hydrogen transportation, and I feel sorry that I didn't hear Mr. Chubais. Ladies and gentlemen, what we did with the most discussed program with the Nord Stream 2 project, where the European Union, with the pressure of US, wanted not to fulfill. What we did now, we brought in a resolution, and Austria is a big investor in this, that we can transport in the pipe 15% hydrogen directly with natural gas. We have to split it later on. That means hydrogen is a good solution. what we are doing in our products with hydrogen. We had at the Comtrans Expo just 2 months ago, we presented with our electrical buses a full hydrogen-driven bus with 22-seater and with 85-seater. That means we brought here 2 clear models for transportation in hydrogen. And what is the difference between hydrogen and electric? We have much more distance which we can do. And I know that fuel cell transportation is very expensive, even 2 to 3 times more than an electric vehicle. But we have another alternative, and we bring in spring this year the first truck fully hydrogen using the combustion engine. Then we must not even change a lot. Even, let's say, we can reduce the cost of the vehicle because at the end of the day, the question is cost per kilometer. And I'm absolutely sure this hydrogen solution based on combustion engine is something where we think this is the right thing, and we need it. Export opportunities. You know, everyone is talking about, and we heard it from the colleague in agriculture, we need to go for export to have a better economy of scale. Automotive is globally the most pressured industry beside the chip industry, where you go about volume. And Russia started with us an initiative where we really are on the way to double export. We are exporting gas products, buses, trucks, and LCVs in over 40 countries globally. And we have in Gas Group a very competitive product range to export. And it's important for the last sentence, it's important for the industry that we have to take all those 3 scopes, starting from where we get the energy, how we produce our product, and the end, what is going on with our product. And this is, I think, the way what we are going, and there is no way around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we'll carry on, as you know, in different formats, but we will work together on that issue, of course. Et maintenant, on va brancher notre français. Et je vous présente le directeur de l'Agence française sur la biodiversité, M. Cyril Palmériat. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
Merci. Dobry dzień. Je vous remercie tout d'abord pour notamment le MIGMO pour son invitation à intervenir aujourd'hui. Je travaille pour l'Office français de la biodiversité, qui est l'établissement nouvellement créé par la France pour porter son ambition en matière de biodiversité en France. Alors, qu'est-ce qui nous relie aujourd'hui? Je partirai de là. Qu'est-ce qui relie nos peuples, nos pays? Pour moi, ce sont des besoins primaires, des besoins d'accès à l'eau, des besoins d'accès à l'alimentation, qui sont basés sur la biodiversité. Je pense qu'il ne faut pas se tromper de combat et il ne faut pas oublier que la nourriture que nous mangeons vient de la biodiversité. Ce sont aussi les espèces qui ne connaissent pas de frontières et le climat qui nous relient. Ce qui nous relie aussi, c'est l'importance que nous attachons de longue date au dialogue entre les peuples et au multilatéralisme. Le changement climatique et la perte de biodiversité sont 2 menaces existentielles qui pèsent aujourd'hui sur l'humanité. Le changement climatique se rappelle à nous par des événements souvent importants, des tempêtes, des pluies torrentielles. La perte de biodiversité est souvent plus difficile à appréhender, puisque ce sont des choses qui disparaissent, que l'on ne voit plus. des oiseaux que l'on voyait il y a 30 ans, des insectes qui étaient beaucoup plus nombreux avant. Voilà, donc on ne le voit pas, mais le process est quand même à l'œuvre. Et je tiens à vous rappeler que le rapport mondial de l'IPBES sur l'état global de la biodiversité de 2019, qui a été approuvé par les différents États membres de l'IPBES, l'a rappelé très clairement, cette crise de biodiversité, dont un des éléments visibles est la disparition d'espèces, qui est entre 100 et 1000 fois supérieure au rythme normal de disparition des espèces, puisque la disparition d'une espèce fait partie du cycle de la vie. Voilà, mais en général, ça prend quelques millions d'années pour une espèce, la vie d'une espèce. Le rythme aujourd'hui est beaucoup plus important de perte de biodiversité. Il est dû à 5 principales menaces, dont le changement climatique, mais également les changements d'usage des sols, en partie liés à l'agriculture, le prélèvement excessif de ressources, notamment par la pêche, et également la pollution et les espèces exotiques envahissantes. Ces pressions, vous le savez, sont portées par nos modes de production et de consommation, qui sont fortement prédateurs sur les ressources naturelles, notamment en produisant beaucoup de déchets. Donc, pour reprendre deux des défis qui ont été mentionnés ce matin par M. Melville, je dirais que nous faisons face ici, aujourd'hui, à une crise de notre modèle de développement qui risque de remettre en cause la stabilité de nos sociétés. Nous connaissons les solutions, elles ont été clairement établies, signalées dans le rapport de l'IPBES, qui demandent des changements radicaux de la façon dont nous occupons les territoires, dont nous utilisons les ressources terrestres et marines, dont nous consommons, et en particulier dans notre alimentation. Nous avons tous un rôle majeur à jouer, et c'est pour ça que j'étais très content d'être associé dans cette table ronde à d'autres partenaires, les agriculteurs, les entreprises, les médias, les institutions financières ont un rôle très important à jouer. En effet, la transition qui est nécessaire exigera des efforts de tous et de la solidarité entre les régions au sein de différents pays, entre les populations et entre les pays. Ce souci d'équité rejoint d'ailleurs la question de la parité homme-femme. Les prochains mois vont être riches en discussions internationales autour des enjeux que je viens de mentionner. Tout d'abord, la COP climat de Glasgow, dont nous avons déjà parlé, sera un moment important pour faire le point sur les efforts des différents pays pour réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et surtout pour rehausser l'ambition, puisqu'on sait que si nous espérons encore rester en dessous des 2 degrés de réchauffement climatique, il faut accroître beaucoup nos efforts. Un des enjeux de cette COP biodiversité, c'est aussi la prise en compte de cette COP climat, c'est la prise en compte de la biodiversité, justement. Notamment dans les mesures d'atténuation, mais aussi d'adaptation. La personne qui parlait avant moi évoquait le fait de planter des arbres pour capter du carbone. Nous savons que c'est une des solutions, mais il faut aussi prendre garde quand on le fait, par exemple, à ne pas planter que des forêts monospécifiques qui ne sont pas forcément très bonnes pour la biodiversité et qui, en plus, ne sont pas résilientes, notamment face au changement climatique. Le président de la République française a, dans cet esprit, annoncé qu'il souhaitait que 30% des financements climat de la France soient orientés sur des solutions favorables ou utilisant la biodiversité. La deuxième grande série de discussions, et qui fait le lien avec ce que je viens de dire, multilatérale pour l'environnement, c'est la conférence pour la biodiversité, qui a été inaugurée cette semaine en Chine et se poursuivra en 2022. Nous savons d'ores et déjà que les cibles qui ont été fixées en 2011 pour essayer d'enrayer la perte de biodiversité n'ont pas été atteintes dans la décennie qui était allouée à ces efforts. En conséquence, les enjeux importants seront à la fois de fixer des cibles ambitieuses, mais également des mécanismes qui permettront de vérifier l'atteinte de ces objectifs et de s'assurer que nous sommes sur le bon chemin. La France porte notamment l'ambition de protéger 30% de la planète via des aires protégées ou d'autres mécanismes qui permettent de répartir l'usage qui est fait des territoires. et porte à ce titre-là, avec notamment le Costa Rica, la coalition pour la haute ambition. Et j'invite les différents pays membres les différents pays ici, qui n'ont pas déjà fait, à rejoindre cette coalition pour la haute ambition, qui vise donc à protéger 30% de la planète. La France porte aussi un objectif de restauration ambitieux des écosystèmes dégradés, de 30% de ces écosystèmes. Pour mémoire, Christine Lagarde, la directrice de la Banque centrale européenne, a mentionné lors du Congrès mondial de la nature, début septembre en France, l'importance de la prise en compte de la biodiversité, au même niveau que le climat, par les instances financières, nationales ou internationales. La troisième échéance, et j'approche de la fin, c'est le redémarrage des négociations sur la protection de la biodiversité en haute mer, BBNJ en anglais, en mars 2022. C'est un vrai défi, c'est le seul texte actuellement contraignant sur l'environnement qui soit en cours de négociation et qui vise à protéger donc l'océan au-delà des juridictions nationales, au-delà des zones économiques exclusives, en mélangeant différents outils, dont notamment l'accès aux ressources génétiques marines, les aires marines protégées, et la France souhaite que ce soit l'occasion de porter l'ambition que l'océan soit reconnu comme bien commun. Et enfin, je ne pourrais terminer mon intervention, même si ça a déjà été évoqué, sans évoquer deux zones qui dépendent beaucoup des discussions et des engagements que je viens de mentionner, donc le climat, la biodiversité et la biodiversité en haute mer, qui sont les régions polaires. Ce sont à la fois des indicateurs des changements globaux qui sont à l'œuvre aujourd'hui, par les impacts du changement climatique, par la pollution qu'on y retrouve, alors que ce sont des régions normalement loin de toute activité. Et ce sont des régions qui seront aussi le refuge de la biodiversité, en tout cas marine, qui monte au fur et à mesure vers les pôles. Et donc je reprendrai ce qu'a dit M. Lamy en insistant sur, notamment en Antarctique, le souhait et l'importance de protéger notamment l'Antarctique oriental et la mer de Weddell, pour qu'ils soient des refuges aux espèces qui s'y trouvent. Et également qui continuent à servir dans le cycle du carbone et par le rôle d'absorption que ces régions ont du carbone émis par les hommes. Voilà, je terminerai en disant que les quelques mois qui viennent seront vraiment l'occasion de traduire nos volontés communes de protéger le climat et la biodiversité, pas juste pour nous, vous l'avez compris, mais pour les générations futures également, et pas forcément juste pour les oiseaux ou les insectes, mais pour protéger nos modes de vie et notre capacité à vivre sur cette planète. Je vous remercie beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, M. Berlinguer. On va continuer, y compris dans le cadre de Peristis Forum, parce que, franchement, M. Lamy est vraiment un champion de Antarctique. Merci beaucoup. Значит, переходим опять к нашей отечественной тематике. Одним из самых важных инструментов для того, чтобы оценить, вы зеленые или не зеленые, а, соответственно, можете вы получить кредит и вообще будете ли развиваться, является ваш рейтинг.
Your rating as a green nation is very important to have access to international financing. Sergei Ivanovich Tishchenko is one such expert, and he will tell you more about ratings.
Да, отлично. Хотел бы выразить признательность за приглашение меня на конференцию.
Thank you for this invitation and the opportunity to speak before the audience.
Представить очень коротко некий
Let
такой
me tell you a
взгляд
few words
изнутри,
about
чтобы
a view of an insider.
загружать слишком и в какой-то степени продолжать.
I don't want to burden you with too much information and too long a speech.
Две цифры. На сегодня объемы привлечения под финансирование устойчивых проектов.
At present, the amount of funds going toward the financing green project is 3 to 4 billion only.
Но я вас уверяю, далеко не все так печально.
But this is only part of the story. The story, real stories, sounds much better.
Я пропускаю некоторые слайды.
I will skip a few slides because much has been spoken about those things.
Но в данном случае я хотел бы обратить ваше внимание, что
Let me draw your attention to the documents that lay out the taxonomy of green industries, and this is our starting point. There is a document, a decree of the Russian government, which are very strict about the classification of industries on the green principle. The strictness comes from the fact that this is a license to access to credits, to issuing bonds and so on. Many have said that Russia has committed itself firmly to going green. A lot is to be done moving forward. I will skip this. All right. In terms of verification, we have to check every project for their green element. We need an institution, an independent institution of verification and verificators. This institution will issue a certificate confirming the green element or the degree of greenness of an industry of a project. This will be a gateway to the Moscow Stock Exchange, to international exchanges, and to other sources of financing. On top of national institutions of verifications, we have international institutions. They can also issue an independent opinion or a certificate of greenness. So this is something to go by. Verification is a fact of life. There are rather institutions that are equipped to do that and to issue certificates certifying the greenness. Looking at the breakdown of 3 to 4 billion that I mentioned, about 140 billion rubles have been issued as green bonds and traded on the Moscow Stock Exchange. However, there's a good number of projects, green projects, that are not listed on Moscow Stock Exchange and are not in this number. There is a reason for that. Decree 706 of the Russian government strictly limits projects from being classified as green unless they pass the requirements. First of all, they have to be green and social. They have to have a deadline, expiration date. They have to target sustainable development and nothing else. For example, Russian railways have issued bonds that were denied green status because they didn't have an expiration date. Now, moving on to the development of the market in the future. Today, the market of green services, market of green projects and social projects is hanging in the balance. It needs support.
личное какое-то мнение, основанное
Now, to be
на
sure, the ministry, the government, the Ministry of Finance do support the idea, but this is a formal support. We badly need a real purpose-oriented program to attract investment into green projects. As yet, we have none.
реализации ее на рынке. Плохо это или хорошо? Да время покажет. Пока трудно
We don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
на уровне налоговых послаблений, каких-то
Of course, we can suggest tax breaks, privileges. If we had that, we would have huge growth in the green sector.
очень динамично.
But as it is, the sector is quite dynamic.
Ну, скажем так, не финансового финансирования, вернее, не финансового стимулирования.
Moreover, we have non-financial means of motivation.
Это те проекты, в которых мы непосредственно
This is a list of projects that we participated in
рынке, безусловно.
and that are not traded on the Moscow Stock Exchange. However, these are huge projects that run into billions of rubles.
Третью колонку, вернее, вторую и третью колонку. То есть
Have a look at the second and third
верифицировали эти
column.
проекты. Вы можете обратить внимание, что социальные облигации верифицировались по
Social bonds have been assessed by a different methodology than green bonds.
мы на самом деле очень ждем, что ВБРФ пойдет и дальше. Это очень, так сказать,
We are looking forward to marrying these two in one single matrix.
не только зеленость, еще и социальные аспекты, да еще и гавань.
We should have a single way to verify both the green and the social.
Свое развитие.
I hope we're still in the pipeline, and someday in the nearest future we will achieve international standards of rating.
Что мы пошли несколько дальше с точки зрения, и объясню почему, с точки зрения вот развития оценки проектов
We went
сектора.
quite a distance beyond in this verification business.
И начали присваивать рейтинги ЕЖ.
We
в
invented a system of rating.
эмитентов или не только эмитентов. Сейчас вы
Issuers, and not only issuers, would be rated by us and given a number.
значит, перспективы этой работы. Но с точки зрения рейтингов хотел бы объяснить, что вот самый верхний уровень
The top level,
практически наивысшими.
ESG1, is
Если говорить по
top assessment on all possible indicators.
уровню таксономии ВБРФ, которая была разработана и которая утверждена постановлением правительства, нижняя часть красная,
The lower echelon
то есть это беда.
it's bad. It's bad for you. It means the industry is in trouble.
Серьезные рейтинги начинаются с ESG4 на уровне
The good level or the passable level starts at ESG4.
движения.
It is a good starting point, a signal to start moving upwards.
ESG2 это уже очень неплохо.
G3, the G2, of course, are a very good result.
Пятерка, так сказать, никто не достоин, ну, может быть, кто-то дотянет.
Well, I don't think any industry is yet to achieve ESG1,
Что сейчас и как
and we're looking forward to the day when someone will hit that
девелоперы,
upper echelon.
Ульяновская область, первый регион, который получил
Another system of rating is regional.
компанию.
Ulyanovskaya Oblast was the first to be rated. It received a ESG3 rating
По себе того, что
based on its
и,
environmental
соответственно,
report.
руководители, руководители хотели бы получить этот рейтинг, уже хорошо хотя бы с точки зрения того, что
Now, the fact that the leaders of regions are asking to be rated, even if they don't achieve anything, is a good thing in itself.
вы будете платить, и многие серьезные организации хотят.
This means that the public is aware, local governments are aware, and ready to go forward.
Рейтинг как таковой для того, чтобы выпустить облигации или же поучаствовать в каком-то конкурсе, где требуется наличие соответствующего
Or to
рейтинга.
participate in some tender.
Группа организаций,
There is a large group of organizations which come because their shareholders demand that their companies should have this rating because they want to have an independent rating.
И вот сейчас я хотел бы обратить
And now I would like to draw your attention
на рейтинг Ульяновской области.
to the rating of the Ulyanovsk region.
Где-то 30,
In fact, now about 50-60 regions have this rating,
получается, как правило, и только для того, когда
and they receive it
эти облигации.
when they want to issue bonds. So this is a necessary condition, otherwise you cannot issue your bonds. This is a new requirement.
Мы имели общение с
And recently
российским оператором, с
we
российского экологического
talked to the Russian Environmental Agency officials. Some time ago, I could not even imagine how efficient this sector is involved in regions with waste management and so on.
И сегодня это уже совсем другой
Now I see that this is quite a different situation.
мусорным заводом,
5 years ago,
который закончился
we will see a waste management plant which was absolutely inefficient. Now the situation is absolutely different.
Я хотел бы сказать,
And
что во многом изменилось.
I would say that the situation has changed considerably
Вопросы экологии, вопросы
thanks to the fact that environmental issues nowadays, waste management issues, they are reflected in the strategies of regional leaders.
более того,
And so the attitude has changed.
программа работы федерального ведомства, то есть федеральной компании,
Moreover, the work of a federal agency,
российский экологический оператор,
Russian environmental operator,
более не
embraces
цифру, более сотни миллиардов инвестиций.
100 billions of investment.
Огромное поле, огромные
So this is a huge field for initiative. So from the point of view of the ESG subject and promotion of this activity, I can predict that very soon our regions will start asking for the environmental rating.
компании, это совершенно
Because for federal companies, it turned out it's very important from the point of view of image, how the regions tackle this problem and whether the federal agencies can work with the corporations which do not have a green label. Thank you. We are going to use your services. Thank you. The floor. Alexei Kokorin, Director of the Program of Energy of the World Fund of Wild Nature. My presentation is going to be very short, but I need my PowerPoint presentation. My presentation is going to continue what our French colleague has started. The picture, the image already is very good. But it will be, my presentation will be down to earth, connected to the subject of our conference about the natural solutions for the organization which I represent, and a Russian national organization of the World Fund of Wild Nature. So the Convention on Climate, this name appeared only at the 25th conference 2 years ago. After many discussions, many debates in various places, in the scientific community, in business community, but it was not reflected in the documents of the conference. Here, it will be correct to remind you that the experience accumulated is quite impressive. Russian experience, international experience. For the past 5 years, we are implementing a German-Russian project in the northern regions of Russia. This is expanding the natural reserves, and it is a solution aimed at preserving nature. And there is a certain here, we are witnessing here, a certain reduction of the emissions So, in other words, we do have experience, both Russian and international, but in the convention documents there is nothing at all. Therefore, where shall we find this text? Mr. Jurgens mentioned that it would be good to create a structure for sustainable development. Well, I hope we can start setting up this structure. I understand, of course, that the time distance is 40 years till 2060, so we have to start. And my experience in working in the United Nations, I worked for 25 years. Everything is done very slow in the UN. And the basic decision in the basic decisions of the Glasgow conference, I hope we'll find this recognition that there should be an appeal to the countries so that in their goals, and it's called input into the Paris Agreement. National income, it's not obligation, not commitment, but input, which would reflect the international decisions. In the Russian input, it only refers to the forests. Why only forests? Why not tundra? Why not the steppes? So this should be identified and included into the international documents. The steppes, tundra, and why not coastal or sea ecosystems? It's difficult to calculate all this, that's true, and probably difficult to express in money, that's okay, yeah? But carbon neutrality is not calculated like this either. But this will be a very good input into carbon neutrality. Of course, it should be mentioned in the documents and in the documents of the conference. Article 5 of the Paris Agreement was adopted, and it is devoted to the role of the ecosystems in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It was Russia which insisted on this Article 5, and that was a victory of our delegation in Paris. So what happened in the past 6 years to this article? Nothing. Not a single solution, no advance. So this should be advanced, should be promoted at the level of nature decisions. So this is our dream, to have a working program, a climate convention on nature decisions in accordance with Article 5 of the Paris Agreement. In Glasgow, it's unlikely they will reach a working program. But eliminating this lacuna in the Paris Agreement, this should definitely be done. And again, I emphasize Article 5. Now, there are more formal ideas, but of course, the auxiliary organs of the convention, the activity should be praised. What else should be included? See the global conclusions for 2023. If it's going simply to count carbon dioxide, that's not enough. The nature solutions must be reflected as well. And there should be recommendations to the Global Environmental Fund for Russia. Maybe it's not very relevant, we don't get any money from them, but we work with Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, we have offices in Almaty. For them, it's of great importance, a special window of opportunity for them, priority to their needs, and the Russian delegation here should support them. Oceans. The word ocean is not mentioned at all in the Climate Convention in 1993, because at that time people did not understand the importance, because our Earth the name should change. It should not be called Earth, but ocean. And another important aspect, Article 6, the mechanisms of sustainable development. And everybody focuses on Article 6.4, the system of projects, and the Russian system of projects should be at least not worse than these criteria. But also there is 6.8, non-market approach, and introducing their nature decisions in the articulation which us and other countries need, those countries where nature is still left. The main channels of support are unlikely to be market, because using commercial interests in protecting nature is unlikely. Tourism, of course, is important, but it is very small. But most of the nature protection will be non-commercial activity. In conclusion, I wanted to emphasize that climate problem and nature solution is difficult to understand. More difficult than nuclear waste disposal or just waste disposal. So we more on the material from some institutes and prepared course training, training courses for school children, for citizens, 100 answers to complicated questions, referring to or just quoting international documents. Well, we understood that there are people who really fight for preserving nature, and there are people who speak about it. Therefore, we are all in favor of the environmental activists advancing the others, or just pushing others forward. People in the financial sphere, in the business sphere, politicians as well, we depend on you. So, the last but not least, Sergei Chernyshev. He represents the Eurasian Commission, and he's going to talk on what we discussed at the beginning. Our colleague who will help us to elaborate our common position in the complicated negotiations on taxonomy and so on. Maybe not just sometime in the future, but we will have to do it fast. Today, those of you who have been watching the discussions since the morning, and we wanted to note that the discussions, like always at this university, they are constructive, scientific, and practical in nature. And all the developments are happening in front of us, in front of our eyes, and we have to map out our activity not to lag behind. In the Eurasian Commission, we believe that we have every reason, answering the previous question, what's going to happen in Glasgow. So, irrespective of what's going to happen in Glasgow, benefit from the discussions there. And of course, we would like to see as a key result some powerful message that would travel all over the world, showing that carbon leakage from one country to another one is unacceptable. So, international instruments have to be worked out in conformity with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And this is connected with market instruments, non-market instruments. So this new instrument would make it possible at the international level, not national level, to identify the sequence and the achievements of countries in implementing the carbon neutrality goals. For this, we have a good basis. The Eurasian Economic Union now is in charge of this activity, supranational, at the supranational level. And after yesterday's statement by our president, we have this as our responsibility. Anatoly Chubais started his address today with reference to yesterday's statement, and we're looking forward to new statements because the climate agenda is being discussed by the 5 leaders of the Eurasian Union, Eurasian Economic Council discussion, and they are sending us the same signals. We all understand that joint activity is necessary. Otherwise, the objectives will not be reached. And we understand that this is a serious financial challenge. And as a Eurasian Economic Union, we want to show an example that international cooperation is necessary. What competences can we use to push forward this activity? We have technical regulation as an instrument, something which was discussed in a very intensive way in the past year, using as example measures which will be applied in 1926 by the European Union. Now, as to the discussions around Article 6, which refers to the need to avoid double accounting, there is also a reverse of this medal, so that efforts undertaken in one jurisdiction should be undertaken in another jurisdiction as well. For this, we need a system of monitoring which could cover the events in different jurisdictions. Another step forward is adopting regulatory mechanisms in the Russian Federation on the taxonomy of green projects. It will make it possible not only of the participants of this activity, those who will have to move very fast and to elaborate the system of measuring the results, but we also will need to promote these instruments. We are only at the first steps in the Eurasian Economic Union, the first steps of creating our common agenda. And this discussion only started in August, when a working group was established. Now we are elaborating a roadmap, which will make it possible for us to identify some key positions. First of all, what branches of our economy, as we believe, are most sensitive and at the same time most responsible for implementing the green development and the green agenda. Second, what projects in our states we are prepared to support and what regulatory instruments are needed. I mentioned one, technical feasibility study, and we should direct all our efforts to make sure that green financing should be implemented through the instruments of the Eurasian Economic Union. And yes, also here I refer to the system of institutes of support, state institutes of support in the Russian Federation here plays the groundbreaking role. Everybody recognizes it. And this is the International Financial Center in Astana, which now gives great attention to this green financing and organizing it in Kazakhstan as well, together with the Eurasian Bank of Development, which was mentioned as well. I do not want to impose on your time anymore, but in answering the question of what's going to happen in Glasgow, I will say that the results of the Glasgow conference will provide a serious incentive for people all over the world, and in the first place in our Eurasian Economic Union. So the incentive to take seriously, very seriously, the climate agenda and the steps which are undertaken now, which are being taken now, would result in forming a sustainable system of climate regulation, which will be sufficient to make sure that Russia and Eurasian Economic Union does not lag behind in this process. Thank you. Thank you.
далеко и высоко. Да? Мы хотим создать зеленый альянс большой Европы, да, включая Евразию, безусловно, с вашей помощью.
Hopefully, this will contribute to consolidating Eurasian integration. Thank you for your presentation. I have to offer to you my excuses and also to the Director General of the Danone Group. We couldn't connect with him earlier, but I'm happy to give him the floor now. Danone, you are on the air. Microphone, please. Matthias, microphone, please.
Aucun problème, merci beaucoup, j'espère que vous m'entendez bien.
Oui, maintenant, oui, on entend très bien. Merci beaucoup. Vous avez la parole.
Merci à vous. Je voulais remercier évidemment les organisateurs. Je voulais remercier
Thank you so much. I hope the sound quality is effective. I first and foremost want to thank the organizers and the moderator for giving me the floor. I want to share with you our vision on the forthcoming Glasgow meeting. The meeting will be dedicated to biodiversity, to the environment in general, to stewardship of the environment, agriculture. Today, agriculture is still based on old models that have been working and used for many, many years and decades without any particular attention to climate or the environment. About 23% of CO2 emissions are accounted for by the agriculture, global agriculture. Danone Group has a few proposals to make. I believe that in investment-wide, we could be more green. Initially, we focused on individual projects on the related to the environment. Our objective was to limit our footprint, to create a positive image of our company, to promote our sales, and simply to do some good for the common good. Then we engaged in pursuing a policy of reducing CO2 emissions in 3 steps. We promoted so-called rehabilitative agriculture with a mission to keep CO2 in the soil. Then came the objective in reducing CO2 emissions by 2030. And the third step is financial policy. Financial policy as related to climate change. We were among the frontliners who stood to gain substantially from applying carbon-friendly or carbon-free technologies. Now I'm moving to biodiversity, which is also closely linked to climate change. Now it is a fact that 75% of all food in the world is produced by modern agriculture, modern farming.
sur Biodiversity, qui est une coalition avec 20 autres grandes entreprises de l'ONU pour promouvoir la biodiversité dans les pratiques d'agriculture.
In Danone, we have partnerships with 20 UN agencies speaking about green economy and sustainability.
En voie de disparition, c'est vrai de la foire Williams, par exemple, en France, et c'est vrai aussi du développement du soja que nous ne voulons pas dépendre.
Many of our partnerships have to do with preserving biodiversity. We want to do something about soya, especially soya imports from Latin America. We want to move to domestic soya production. And last but not least is security.
Nous avons comme objectif d'avoir 100% de packaging recyclable d'ici à 2025.
Our objective is 100% recycled packaging for all agricultural products that we produce.
L'enjeu est à la fois de lutter évidemment contre le changement climatique.
And our experience tells us that this is an achievable goal.
Considérer l'agriculture pas seulement comme un problème, mais aussi comme une solution.
Agriculture is not only a problem. We should treat agriculture as part of the solution.
Même titre que l'industrie. Et enfin,
Agriculture has many things to offer. It can be the source of solution and the source of good stewardship of biodiversity. We need to form a partnership between ourselves and between governments. Thank you. Thank you.
Pour le délai assez long, hein, mais ce n'est pas notre faute. Je vous demande pardon encore une fois, mais je peux vous dire au nom de tous les participants que
That wasn't long, but it was on the point.
je vais demander nos amis Azerbaïdjan, Kazakhstan,
Your brand Danone is very appreciated in Russia, so thanks again.
Завершаем нашу сессию. Я хочу вам сказать, что две сессии будут очень интересные прямо вот сейчас начинаться. Те, кто
Now, information for you. We are about to start two more sections, very interesting section, business
уходите и налево,
and science. Science to the left, business to the right.
всему научат, вам все расскажут.
Interesting stories wait for you out there. Thank you so much.